So welcome to this fourth video of the Philosophy of History series. In this video, I'm going to be talking about perhaps one of the most complicated philosophers in the history of philosophy. That would be Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. And particularly, I'm going to introduce to you how Hegel's philosophy of history makes us imagine how history works. And I hope this video can help you in that imagination. Now, I'm going to take this one slide by slide because I know it's a bit complicated if I'm going to take this one as usual, like an entirely holistic approach. So I'm going to take this one slide by slide and just give you the important points in every slide. So this first slide is something that I took from the preface from Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. Now, what is weird about this preface is that, well, Hegel will start with trying to say that it is customary to give a preface to any book, especially in terms of trying to explain what the book is all about. But then, as you can see here, you can pause the video if you need to read this text. He said, in the case of philosophical work, however, such an explanation seems not only superfluous, but in view of the nature of the subject matter, even inappropriate and misleading. Now, you should imagine this explanation on the part of Hegel as something like, in the common use of the preface usually prepares the way for the content of the book. Hegel's point here, the reason why he would say that it is superfluous, especially with this book of his, is that when you try to prepare the way in that sense, in the general sense of preparing the way for the content of the book, you are already writing the content of the book. Right? So you're prepping the road towards the main content, but in so doing, you're already giving the content anyway. That's the reason why it's superfluous and in some sense inappropriate and misleading. Because the sense of direction the preface gives is that you are somehow building up from one key element to the next. That you are preparing this path to a kind of understanding of what the book is all about. Now, but his point is, in doing so, you're already writing the book itself. You're already writing the content. So it's misleading because it would appear that you are preparing, but in some sense, you're actually already within the content itself. Okay. Now, the second point, or my second reason as to why I started with this, is that if you look at Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, Philosophy of Nature, Science of Logic, Philosophy of Right, all these books appear to be kind of introduction to a greater system. That it is kind of opening up all this sense of direction, all this, let's just say, doors. It's opening up doors, and it makes you want to expect something, what's behind the door. That there has to be something hidden behind this, these books. These books are trying to tell us that these are doors that leads you to, let's just say, to a single point, to a whole point. And we never really get to that. Because Hegel wants us to imagine that there's something behind these doors, that eventually we will get what this thing is, this idea is. But then this is a case of like, as you journey towards the door, you're actually, the same way as the preface, the misleading sense of direction, as you approach the door and attempt to open it, you'll probably not find anything. This is a case of the journey is more important than the destination. So you're expecting something behind, say, the door or behind the curtain, but then in the end, you'll find out that you're already bringing what you're looking for into that space that you're opening. It's superfluous, it's inappropriate, and it's misleading, but there's a reason for that, because the journey is more important than the destination. So again, the point here is, as you try to infiltrate what Hegel means about these things and expect something beneath the form, the formalities, you're expecting something, then you end up realizing that in the process of trying to reach that point, you already learned so much. So when you reach that point and then you realize, aha, this could probably it. But you also realize that everything that happened in your past that led you to that point are now connected in a single chain. That without any of those events in the past, you would never be in that point. Because as you are moving along, going towards the point, you're literally developing yourself, you're becoming, you're writing the book. Thus, Hegel would say it's superfluous. It's misleading. It gives you a sense of direction, but the point's already there. When you're writing the book, you already know what to do. You already have this scheme. You already rationalize the book. But then the preface would give your reader a sense of maybe perhaps the author has not yet discovered what he's supposed to be discovering. So, kind of like a cycle here, but we'll get to that. My second point comes from a portion in the Elements of the Philosophy of Right, actually the introduction, the Elements of the Philosophy of Right. And I think this is like in the last paragraph of the introduction, in one of probably Hegel's most concise description of his philosophical system. And I will read this one, starting from this point here. As the thought of the world, it appears only at a time when actuality has gone through its formative process and attained its completed state. Now, this has something to do with the idea that philosophy usually comes late. It usually comes late to realize. Right? So when I say the word realize, you use it in the usual way you do it. Like say, I realize that so and so and so and so. Philosophy realizes something. See? So Hegel will say, as the thought of the world, philosophy, it appears only at a time when actuality has gone through its formative process and attained its completed state. This lesson of the concept is necessarily also apparent from history, namely that it is only when actuality has reached maturity that the ideal appears opposite the real and reconstructs this world, this real world, which it has grasped in its substance in the shape of an intellectual realm. Okay. What does that mean? It means what philosophy does is shape experience upon the point of realization. Once you realize something about the world, that point of realization becomes the spirit or reason in which you reconstruct the world or your past in a very specific way, in which one mode of experience leads to another mode of experience, so on and so on. I think at this point I will have to introduce to you what reason is for Hegel. Reason for Hegel is that aspect of understanding in which whatever happens before, whatever happens, like if at present I'm in a mood and something happened in the past that sets me in this mood, all that happened in the past, all the things that happened in the past will be linked together by reason in order to, let's just say, to explain, to give myself an explanation as to my current state. Especially when you reach a point of realization. Have you ever experienced, for example, when you somehow something in your life or somewhere in your life you realize something about your life, and that point of realization usually looks back at the past and then structures the past based on that kind of reasoning. So reason is that part of understanding which usually looks back and links experiences together so that they form a kind of narrative justifying the point of realization. Okay? So the point of realization transcends the experience into something that makes you say, aha, I realize something. That is what Hegel means with his German term Aufhebung. Aufhebung is basically just sublation. You understand something about the world and you kind of like, you transcend what you understand about the world. And out of this reasoning, this is where reason now stretches its eyes, flies through the past of the things that already happened, flies through it, links them together in order to supplement the realization itself. Right? So what you have here is the actual experience itself in its contingency. You live through your life, blah, 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 and then voila, at some point in that life, you realize something, and that point of realization is the spirit. It's the reason in and for itself. That's reason in itself, meaning that's how reason works, and reason for itself, meaning reason will now construct or reconstruct the real world and shape them into that intellectual realm. This trying to connect modes of experiences, experience A, B, C, D, modes of experiences, to connect them in a specific order, that is what we call the cunning of reason. So the experience of realization gets to sublate experience. That's why you feel like you're progressing something, towards something. And events in the past, experiences in the past, contingencies will suddenly emerge as necessities. What do we mean by that? All the events that happen in my life, as I am living it, these are contingent, meaning as they happen, I'm just living through life. There's no connection. Well, of course, there's cause and effect, but there's really no connection at all that somehow, let's just say, the connection itself gives meaning to my action. I'm just living through life. But once I am in this point of realization, then everything becomes necessary. Everything that happened in my past will be linked in a kind of chain, such that from one mode of experience to another, they have become necessary in order for the realization to occur. Okay? Lastly, I'm going to comment on this idea of what Hegel refers to as rational is actual, actual is rational. What does that mean? Reason, that point of realization, is actually a product of a kind of actual experiences in life. Something happened in the past sets you in the mood, and within that mood, you realize something. So the rational is actually based on the actual. It is the actual. Alright? When you reach the point of realization and reason somehow emerges, it's based on the actual. But the actual becomes rational when it is reconstructed from the real world to the intellectual realm. So you imagine Hegel, and there's always these two realms. We have the real world wherein our experiences are contingent. There's contingency almost all the time, and this is where Hegel's really basing on that in the real world, our experiences are usually contingent. Almost all the time. There's no grand plan that we write in a piece of paper and then we just have to execute the plan. Maybe in some ways there are people who do that, but there are contingencies in our real life that we really cannot avoid. Accidents, I don't know, like something happened that you did not expect. These are contingencies. But when you reach the point of realization, all these real world contingencies becomes the necessary events, the necessary experiences within the intellectual realm. Because within that intellectual realm, all the experiences in the past are then related and linked in order to justify the realization itself. Okay? So in that sense, the actual is rational from the point of realization. When you realize something about your life, everything that happened in the past now makes sense. They are now connected by reason. So the actual has become rational. But the rational was actually the product of the actual. We live through life and then you realize something. That's actual becoming rational. In a sense, the rational is based on the actual. Okay, and so we go to the last line in this passage, and this is probably one of Hegel's most beloved lines. When philosophy paints its gray in gray, a shape of life has grown old, meaning everything already passed. So when the philosopher writes this intellectual realm, it's based on a world that has grown old. And it cannot be rejuvenated, but only recognized by the gray in gray of philosophy. So the world that the philosopher describes is already part of a realization, and that world has already come to pass. But it can be recognized by the very world, by the very intellectual realm that the philosopher writes. Thus, as a closing, Hegel wrote, "The owl of Minerva begins its flight only with the onset of dusk." The owl of Minerva, of course, is reason. Reason stretching its wings, flying through the past, making sense of it, connecting everything, wherein the contingency becomes necessity, the rational becomes actual, the actual becomes rational. This is the function of reason. And of course, sublation. Okay. Now, in this slide, I'd want to introduce first the idea, no pun intended, that Hegel tends to use idea, absolute, substance, and essence almost in the same light. So whenever Hegel says idea, or the absolute, or substance, or essence, what he's really referring to is basically the same. Because if we go back to, again, our example about the point of realization, you realize something in your life. What did you realize? And to what direction are we talking about here? Right? There has to be a kind of, you're trying to reach out, something that can fulfill your existence. Right? So when we say idea, absolute, substance, essence, we're just basically looking at, say for example, the essence of my life. When you realize something about your life, what you realize is the essence of your life. At that point, you reach absolute point. You've reached the absolute point. You feel like you've realized something. And out of this absolute point comes reason. You begin to think, reason out. Everything that happened before, they are actually related to what I realize now, and without them, there would never be this point of realization. That feeling of the past being now connected, being remodeled, being reconstructed into this intellectual realm, this is the cunning of reason. It has something to do when we reach out, when we begin to realize how close we are, how near we are to the idea, the absolute, or the substance, or the essence of our existence. But absolute, substance, essence is subject. This one again comes from the Phenomenology of Spirit. Absolute is subject. And in some translations, substance is subject. Now, the best way that I found to explain this is from this movie, which I hope you are familiar with, Kung Fu Panda. Surprise, surprise. Let's check this one out. Try to remember what I've just said a few minutes ago and relate them all to what you are about to see.
Behold the dragon scroll. It is yours.
Wait, what happens when I read it?
No one knows, but legend says you will be able to hear a butterfly's wing beat.
Whoa, really? That's cool.
Yes, and see light in the deepest cave. You will feel the universe in motion around you.
Wow! Can I punch through walls? Can I do a quadruple backflip?
Focus.
Will I have invisibility?
Focus.
Huh?
Focus.
Oh, yeah.
Read it, Poe, and fulfill your destiny. Read it and become the Dragon Warrior.
Whoa!
It's impossible to open. Okay, come on, baby. Come on now.
Thank you. Probably loosened it up for you, though. Okay, here goes. like...
What?
Here, look.
No, I am forbidden to look upon... Blank. I don't understand. Look, it's the Dragon Warrior.
Hey, Dad.
Oh!
Good to have you back, son.
Good to be back.
Let's go, Po. So for our next shop, it's time to face it. The future of noodles is dice-cut vegetables, no longer slices. Also, I was thinking, maybe this time we'll have a kitchen you can actually stand up in. You like that? Po, I'm sorry things didn't work out. It just wasn't meant to be. Po, forget everything else. Your destiny still awaits. We are noodle folk. Broth runs deep through our veins.
I don't know, Dad. Honestly, sometimes I can't believe I'm actually your son.
Po, I think it's time I told you something I should have told you a long time ago.
Okay.
The secret ingredient of my secret ingredient soup.
Oh.
Come here. The secret ingredient is nothing.
Huh?
You heard me. Nothing. There is no secret ingredient.
Wait. It's just plain old noodle soup? You don't add some kind of special sauce or something?
Don't have to. To make something special, you just have to believe it's special.
There is no secret ingredient.
Absolutely subject. And that lesson will be repeated in this one.
Finally. Oh, yes. The power of the Dragon Scroll is mine. It's nothing.
It's okay. I didn't get it the first time either.
What?
There is no secret ingredient. It's just you.
Okay, so if we go back a little bit here. Now, the idea, of course, in this movie was what is excuse me, what is the essence of the Dragon Warrior, for example. And in the beginning here, in this contingent events, they are just happening in the film. You're just following through the sequence of the story. Don't really mean anything, but we were told that somehow this script has the secret sauce, the absolute, the substance, the essence of what it means to be Dragon Warrior. But then, of course, this was what happened. And even the master himself did not know. There was nothing there. And then, of course, if you're watching the movie and then you're just playing through the contingency, you will probably miss the fact that all that they are staring at are themselves. And the master, showing his unwisdom, cannot explain this. Alright? And the only moment of realization for the main character occurs in this conversation with his father. Now, what happened here? The point of realization, wherein modes of experience, which are probably not related, it may look like has nothing to do with being Dragon Warrior, but then what his father said, that there's no secret ingredient, made him reach the point of realization. Because this conversation is about the secret ingredient. But then what the main character saw, which he eventually, immediately realized. And this is the point of realization this year. Look at his expression. His father told him something about their business. He, on the other hand, is thinking something different. And this is the cunning of reason. This is the spirit that we are talking about. He begins to see the relationship between one mode of experience to another. And what he got is of Hegel. He sublates himself. He is not the failure of a dragon warrior. No, he's not. And it has nothing to do with whatever secrets or essence were there. Because the absolute is subject. What do we mean by that? By this scene, the absolute is subject.
There is.
Look at that. The point of realization. And from that point, there's going to be no turning back. The past will be interpreted based on this point. So whatever he
Is no secret ingredient.
whatever experiences that he had now makes sense. So as he was staring back at those steps, if you remember the film, he's encountering the very experiences that he had before, but now they are shaped by the spirit, by reason itself. Because somehow something was realized. The absolute was realized. And the absolute is subject. It's just him all along. That's why at the very end we get a redoubling of this image of the guy or the hero who was searching for the essence of being a dragon warrior only to find it within himself. There was nothing in the text or in the script or in whatever this one is. There's nothing there. Just like what I said, there's nothing behind the curtain. It was actually you all along. The absolute is subject, or the substance is subject. Now you're probably beginning to see when a historian writes history, the historian is always at the point of absolute position. And within that absolute position, he is the subject, or she is the subject. That's how Hegel is a historicist. Just in case, you encounter this idea of historicism, that you have to look at history based from its own context, its own generation, its own time. No. Hegel was historicist because at the moment when he wrote his history or gave his lecture on history, he is performing the act based on the point of absolute. And in that point, he is guided by the owl of Minerva, the spirit itself, reason in itself and for itself. It explains everything for itself, for trying to understand how the realization emerge. And that realization, of course, is the subject. Now, there is a kind of duality in this. That there is the actual real world, and then there is the intellectualized universal history governed by the cunning of reason, connected by reason, so to speak, in order to form a narrative. They're almost the same, except for the point of realization, wherein the absolute appears to be nearest to the one writing the history. So the next one, in terms of history, you have to understand what's the absolute there. And we've already heard about freedom. From Kant, we've said, what is history? It's the marching forward of reason and freedom. In some sense, that is true still in terms of Hegel. But Hegel imagines it in a very weird way. History is always a looking back. It's not a looking forward. We cannot use what we've realized as a form of a historical law to determine what will happen in the future. That's it. We can probably project something, but it's not exact. It's not exact as science. Okay. So, freedom exists as substance. Again, this one actually comes from Hegel's philosophy of right. Freedom exists as substance, but then in the previous slide we say the substance is subject. So what do we mean by freedom in this sense? I'll probably first give you this short video. For those who are my friends in Facebook, then you've probably already saw this one. So I stop right here. This one here is basically the old way of looking at philosophy. At the surface level, you have your formation, the formality. Then, of course, substance is at the back. It's supposedly hidden. But then, as we found out in the previous slide, Hegel do not really subscribe to this idea that there's something behind the curtain, that there's something beneath appearance, beneath the form. This one, that this is the contingent world, and somehow that there's a law of history that governs the contingency of the world, and this law of history makes everything necessary. This is not Hegel's model. As I've said, I think in my post in Facebook, this is more or less Vico's model. If you remember Giambattista Vico. This was Vico's model. Hegel's model is more weird. In some sense, the Moebius strip is Hegel's example of the substance is subject. And when I said like there was a kind of circle, like anyway. Okay, I stop from this one. This is the point of realization. This one here. At this point, the one that realizes something of the absolute or the substance, begins to acknowledge that his life is not really divided between form and substance. You get through the form, but then you also get through the substance. What does that mean? Freedom exists as substance. It's not a goal or something. It's not something that is hidden behind a curtain. Freedom is us, so to speak. Freedom exists as substance, but the substance is subject. And who is the subject? We are. We are the subject. The best way to imagine this is, maybe some of you have heard of the philosopher Martin Heidegger. Now, Martin Heidegger spoke something about the authentic life or the authentic self. The life's or existence's authenticity has something to do with trying to understand what happened in your past. Link that past into the thing that sets you in the mood in the present. What you have in the present is that you always associate yourself with things, objects, and most importantly, other human beings. You associate yourself with that. And Heidegger introduced this idea of inauthenticity. Life becomes not authentic. What does that mean? The self, or Dasein, or me being here, being there, being here, being there, Dasein. You as a person, you begin to imitate what culture gives you. And at some point, you begin to believe what they believe, know what they know, act what they act. Right? Heidegger calls this the they self. Why? Because somebody will ask you, what's your philosophy in life? You'll then say, oh, they said. How does your life works? Well, they said. What's your objective or goals in life? Well, they said. It's always the they. Sometimes there's an unconscious element to this in which the very cultural, socio-symbolic construct of your reality somehow finds its way to you. Heidegger calls that one the falling. You fall into the they, making your life inauthentic. And in that sense, you're no longer free. You are not free. Why? Because all your actions are based on this some kind of repetition automatism, where you're just basically repeating what society or the social symbolic network tells you to repeat. That's not authentic. So what is authentic? Authentic is you looking at your past, learning from your present, and projecting whatever you've learned from both into the future. Your ability to do that is freedom. When you follow what other people says, that's not freedom. When you begin to learn from yourself and use that one to project your own future, that's freedom. That's your substance. Freedom exists as substance as much as substance is subject. That's our ideal. Our absolute, in some ways, our essence, our substance. Okay. And of course, everything that I've said is here. So now you see in this diagram the kind of the two realms, the intellectual realm and of course the real world as Hegel imagines it. In this world, you have points A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. And K, of course, is here a point of realization, wherein this mode of experiences or these modes of experiences are then sublated of Hebung, sublated into the sublated meaning reconstructed. If we go back to the previous slides, reconstructed into this intellectual realm, wherein all the modes of experiences are now being explained not as contingent events, but events that are connected to, defined by, related to, by A. A, of course, here is the sublation of K. K transcending to the level of the absolute. And once K does that, tries to reach the idea, the essence of itself, it begins to transform into A containing spirit. Spirit now flies through the past, connects them all together in relation to A. See the arrow here? These arrows did not exist here. Because as I've said, these are just contingent experiences. What happens is, after the contingency is turned into necessity, the spirit or reason itself will construct or reconstruct everything such that the point of realization becomes like something that exerts a gravitational pull to everything that happened in the past. And this transformation of the contingent to the necessary, this sublation emerges in us as history. Because the cunning of reason here means that reason is trying to link everything together so that the meanings of these experiences will be related to this experience, to this realization. Okay, I hope that's clear enough. So, what we have here is Hegel at some point actually calls this one the pivot. So you're kind of like imagining it as having this pivot. It launches actual events that are contingent events, actual contingent events. It's being pivoted to the intellectual realm, but this time already reconstructed so that they are in relationship to one another, say in terms of causality, cause and effect. All in the name, of course, of realization. This realization here is of Hebung. When you realize something, like, aha, you're beginning to see the absolute, or you're beginning to see the spirit, or the essence, or the substance. And in this absolute point, this is where, in this absolute point, in the absolute spirit of this time, this is where the historian writes history. And this is why Hegel's philosophy of history is his version of history. So if you do not see the dialectics in all of that, then perhaps we'll use this classic example of dialectics. What is of Hebung? Of Hebung is the negation of the negation. The main character thought he is not the dragon warrior because there was no dragon warrior in the script. But then, that's the negation. Right? He's the panda. He's the Kung Fu Panda. He's supposed to be dragon warrior. But then, he's not. Is negated by the very fact that there's no such thing as a dragon warrior. But that negation itself was also negated by the very realization that he is the dragon warrior. Not because, and this is where freedom emerges, not because a text told him how to be dragon warrior, but because the experiences that he had in his past is the very mechanism in which he becomes the dragon warrior. Again, the negation was negated. That's of Hebung. That's sublation. That's the point of realization. So what we have here is, if you have listened already to your assigned lectures, then you'll probably realize that at some point in that lecture, you have this example of undifferentiated unity, differentiated disunity, and differentiated unity. Now, the reason why I don't subscribe to the idea that the dialectics is triadic, because there's always the idea. And it's not usually based on the idea of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That's really just bullshit. Hegel did not say anything of that sort. So you just crush them out. It's total nonsense. Because the way this works, the way the dialectics work, is not entirely within that structure. Like for this one, the undifferentiated unity of the family faces its negation with the differentiated disunity of society. But then, it's precisely this differentiation that the idea of family gets to be remodeled by here in this example, the idea of the state. What is the state? The state is making the negation, which is here, the differentiation that we see in society. Society is composed of other individuals that are different from our respective families. This differentiation is the negative. We see unity in our family. We see disunity in differentiation. But the goal has always been the idea of family. Once you realize that that's the absolute point, that that's the essence, that's the substance, then we begin to realize that it's not necessarily that these two are really just oppositions, but they can be sublated to a new goal, to a new reaching out of the idea. The idea here is just basically family, the unity that you see in family. The negation of a differentiated disunity is a differentiated unity by way of the state. The state recognizes our differences, but sets out rules, sets out laws in order for us not to kill each other and to be united. This unity is, of course, will eventually emerge as a kind of spirit. That's why in Hegel we have the national spirit or the world spirit. Because in our attempt, this is the very Kantian element in Hegel's philosophy of history, in our attempt to perfect differentiated unity or to perfect the state, we will have to act as a united world, a world spirit, and we have to act as a national spirit. There's a very nationalist element to this side of Hegel. So, this too becomes sublated to the state. Once you realize that I don't really have to oppose differentiation and disunity, I can actually create a system wherein there is differentiation, but at the same time, disunity becomes unity. There's a becoming involved in terms of that. That's the state. Now, all the things that I've done is just basically to prepare you to reread this summary by Dr. Staloff, as you have listened in the audio lecture, to prepare you to reread this summary based on the things that I've said. So we'll read them. Try to see if, as I read them, you begin to see what I've said since the beginning of the lecture. History is the dialectical process whereby spirit comes to know itself and realizes its idea. Freedom is the idea of the spirit, and spirit is reason in and for itself. The means of this realization, or cunning of reason, is the passions of the individual as both subject and object of history, and its form is the state. The national spirit is a moment in the development of the world spirit, and for each such moment as for all, the owl of Minerva spreads its wings only with the setting of dusk. I hope I've contributed to your understanding of what Hegel's philosophy of history is. You have to understand that this may be a case wherein I am not really laying you down what exactly is Hegel's philosophy, because all of these, the things that I'm saying, I'm very much influenced by the, let's just say, the Ljubljana school of theoretical psychoanalysis, which is very Hegelian. Lectures from Slavoj Žižek, especially his dissertation, his book, The Sublime Hysteric, the lectures by, especially the lectures by Mladen Dolar, one of Žižek's friends. I'm very much influenced by them. And the best way I can say this is, consider this lecture as a ladder to reach something. And once you reach something, you can just throw the ladder out. That one actually comes from Ludwig Wittgenstein's Tractatus, in the very last portion of that book. He would then say that, this book is just a ladder which you can throw. As long as you've reached a higher point of realization, as you reach a higher level of understanding as to what Hegel's philosophy is. And I hope that you don't only see the meanings of the words that I underline here in terms of what Dr. Staloff tells you in his lecture, because what Dr. Staloff said in his lecture, that's conventional Hegel. That's Hegel in the mainstream. What I've just did, the lecture that I just did, is based on a different interpretation of Hegel. This one comes from the interpretation of Slavoj Žižek and Mladen Dolar, and more or less even at some degree of my own reading of the Phenomenology of Spirit. So, I hope that helps. And our next lecture is about Marx. And when we go through Marx, all we are actually doing is just literally turning this model into a kind of a scientific law to use for induction. That's all there is. Hegel wants to limit history in its looking back. That's why Hegel produces philosophy of history. That's his version of universal history. We don't have to say that that's accurate. What Marx does moves it forward.